Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you to Mary, not just for introducing me, but for organizing this entire conference. She is amazing and a rock star. Thank you. I'm going to spend a little bit of time thanking you. I'm thanking you on behalf, not just of me, but of all of the people of Texas, all of the students at your colleges and universities, and basically all the people of the United States. Why? Because you are guiding, you are grounding the leaders of our institutions who are transforming what America will be in the 21st century. That really is what you are doing. And I thank you for taking the time, the energy, the passion, and commitment to do so. So give yourselves a hand here, because nobody else is going to do it for you today. Regent Johnson actually told you this morning most of the things which you are going to hear in a little more detail now. She did an excellent job of portraying what a seasoned board and board member will care about and how that board member will conduct her or himself on behalf of the institution. And so I want to give her a lot of credit for that, because that makes my job a whole lot easier. Now, I teach, as she indicated, and one of the things you do when you teach is you have lots of props. You have props not because you necessarily need the props, but because it makes you feel better to have props. So I have some props here that I want you to take a look at. They're all in your folders. And I just want you to know what you have. When Mike Reeser talked this morning about the difference between management and governance, that's in his folder. Rick Lagan, who's the head of the Association of Governing Boards of Colleges and Universities here in the United States, wrote the 10 Habits of Highly Effective Boards. I commend that to you. He also talked about the fiduciary duties of governing board members. That's essentially your responsibilities on behalf of your institutions. You will find in here also what Vice Chancellor Gomez is about to tell you a little bit later about your duties as required by, and you're going to love this, the code. I'm sure you've all memorized the code. And finally, there is a on the side of how you do your business, there's something that deals here about the do's and don'ts and conflicts that you may encounter. So I commend all of those to you. They're takeaways that are in addition to any of the things that are on that thumb drive. So thanks very much. That's how you do your business. This is why you do your business. This is what you're trying to achieve. 60 by 30 Texas is a goal that will, in fact, transform this state. And by transforming this state, you will transform this nation. That is your responsibility. That is your opportunity. That really is the goal that Texas has set for itself. And I commend you and I commend the state for what you have done. So having said all that, what am I really going to talk about? What I'm really going to talk about is what you must do as board members, what you ought to do as board members, and what you could do as board members. The first is, what does the law require you to do? First and foremost, you have to follow the law. The law says that you have a fiduciary responsibility for your institutions. Now, what in the world does that word mean? It is a word that you only find among accountants, usually. What does the fiduciary responsibility mean in this context? The fiduciary responsibility that you have puts on you duties of care, of loyalty, and of obedience. The care means you have to actively and knowledgeably participate in the governance of your institution or institutions. In other words, read all that stuff that they talked about in this morning's opening presentation. You have a duty of loyalty. You're operating in the interest of the state and of the institution, and not in your own personal interest or in the interest of any other organization or entity. In other words, your loyalty as a board member is to the state of Texas and to the institution for whom you are a board member. And obedience, what does that mean? Follow the bloody law. Essentially, you have to follow the laws and rules that the state or the nation have prescribed. You are, if you do those things, doing what Mike Reeser said was the most important duty you have. You are protecting the institution. You are safeguarding the asset that has been entrusted to you. Fiduciary really confers on you that safeguarding responsibility. The second duty that you have is to appoint chancellors or presidents. That's a very important role. Choosing the right chancellor or president and supporting her or him appropriately will allow you to succeed as an institution. Choosing the wrong chancellor or president or not supporting her or him as she or he may need could well lead to disaster. And you have seen that at some institutions around the country where the wrong president came in or the wrong president wasn't supported rightly and the institution foundered. We are in a highly competitive environment in higher education, particularly for smaller institutions. You cannot afford to make a mistake in hiring, and you cannot neglect to support the president or chancellor to achieve the mission that you have talked about. And we'll get to that relationship with the chancellor or president a little bit later. You are required by law to clearly define the mission of your institution. What is it that you intend to achieve? That's what the mission is. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? You need to ensure the autonomy of the institution. I'm going to come back to that because that's a tricky thing in a political environment. So it's going to get its own slide. And you have to reach out to external constituencies. You have to enhance the public image of your institution. You're burnishing the brand in common parlance. You're nurturing the institution. You're providing policy direction. You're required to adopt a transfer policy. Not very many states require that. You have that requirement. We're going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon, I think. And one of your main roles is to make sure that you convey to the commission, to Mary and Raymond and their board, what the position of your institution is on any important issue. That's your job under statute. If you don't do anything else, you got to do those things. What else maybe should you do, ought you do? You got to remember that you are accountable to the state and the public for both, bless you, both what you do and how you act, but also for the performance of your institution, both in how it conducts its business and in what it achieves. You have that responsibility. You work through your president or chancellor, but ultimately, as the fiduciary, you are holding the asset in trust for the people of the state of Texas, and you're accountable to them. You have to define the terms of shared governance. This is an unusual concept that we have in American higher education. You don't necessarily have that in higher education all around the world, where the faculty and the students have a role in governing the institution. But you set the rules of engagement. How will that occur? How will consultation occur? How will decisions be made? Which decisions can be made in which ways? They won't all be done the same way. Not everything is to be done in the same fashion. Not all decisions are alike. Curricular decisions are one thing, financial decisions are another, student discipline decisions are yet another. You may have very different processes and very different involvement from the stakeholders in terms of shared governance in each of those arenas. You have to understand the legal and regulatory environment and ensure compliance with laws and standards. Back to this duty of obedience. It's your responsibility to know, or at least to ask, are we fulfilling our legal and regulatory responsibilities? And finally, you have to conduct your business in an above-board and exemplary fashion. The mission, I think the mission is the magic. Achieving what it is that you say you will do. You have to ensure that the institution fulfills its purpose and mission. and that unites the board members and the president and the faculty and the students and the alums and every other stakeholder, because that is what holds you together. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Who are you as you try to achieve that? And it goes back to the culture of the individual, institution, or system. It goes back to what that system was created to do, or that institution was created to do, and what the strategic plan, you're the board, what that roadmap to success will look like. Where are you going? How do you align the purpose, mission, plans, actions, and resources of the institution to achieve that? You're not going to do it. You're going to devise it and help devise it and develop it and hold the administration accountable for making sure you're making progress on that. Why? Because that is how you will meet the needs of Texas and of Texans. It is how you will satisfy the public purpose for which your organization, your university, your college, your system was created. And you will do it ethically, accountably, but there's that word again, autonomously. But you're not going to do it directly. You heard that this morning. You have one, and I think Mike was correct in saying it's really two employees. You got the president or chancellor, and you got the chief auditor, who is supposed to report to you as well as to the president, you know. You need to develop a partnership with that president or chancellor to refine the mission and to achieve the goals that have been set for, that you set, as well as the statute sets for your institution. You want clear expectations in that communication with the president or chancellor. You need to know, she or he needs to know what it is you expect, and you need to know what she or he needs from you. You need to have a common sense of purpose. What are you trying to do? A shared vision for how you intend to make that happen. An agreed upon plan. What is it that we're going to do not each day, but each year or each quarter in order to fulfill that vision, achieve that purpose? And finally, you and the president or chancellor need to find ways to communicate with and involve other stakeholders. We are a consultative business. We consult with everybody. We listen to everybody because part of the value of the academy comes from developing a mutual understanding and building on the knowledge and skills, or the knowledge that has been accumulated over time. I mean, think about how we were created as entities. Originally, back in the Middle Ages. Originally, it was to preserve the accumulated knowledge of the Western world. That's why universities started. It wasn't even to transmit it. That came a little bit later. And it wasn't to create it. That came even later. So the three pillars that you will have heard about over and over again from your faculty of preserve, transmit, and expand knowledge, you really have to recognize that you don't do that as an individual, you do that collectively. And so including all the stakeholders in both developing and executing is important. There it goes. Okay, there's that word again. Autonomy. Why is it important? What does it mean in our context? Why is it important? First, accountable to the public now and into the future. And I want to focus on that future part because that's what distinguishes your role from that of someone who oversees a state agency, from someone who is charged with fulfilling the requirements of the governor. Yes, you want to be with the governor. It's very important. But in fact, you have to look to the future. You have to make sure that your institution or system will in fact be true to its mission and will survive and thrive to do so for the next 100 years. So your horizon is not the next 4 to 8 years of whoever's term in office occurs. And in communications that you have with elected leaders, part of the give and take that you will have will deal with your view that you have to look over the horizon and their view of, well, we want to get these things done right now. And that kind of attention will occur. But part of your responsibility is to ensure that the institution is autonomous of the short-term politics of any given time and place. And that's true in every state. That's not just true in Texas. That's true everywhere. Because if you're a governor, you want to do stuff and you want to do it now. But if you have to look at the long-term welfare of the institution, you have to be able to talk effectively with that governor about, well, yeah, we'd love to achieve those things, but we have to do X and Y and Z as well, or instead, or in addition, or something, or we modify. It's a communication. You care about it because you get public funding. Mary just talked about all the public funding that you get, which compared to a lot of states, it's huge, both in the aggregate and on a per-student basis. Texas does reasonably well. Texas has made an investment. Texas cares about the future of its students and of its economy and of its polity. And that investment shows it. You're responsible for making sure that investment is well used. Used legally, used ethically, used responsibly, and used effectively. Those are your responsibilities, working through your president or chancellor. Remember, we talked about what the role of the academy is, but that really, in order to preserve, transmit, and expand knowledge, in the American context, that has meant a tradition of independent thought. My first encounter with higher education, I'm very old, was in the 1950s. In the 1950s, during the McCarthy era. In the 1950s, when professors at the institution where I ultimately got my graduate degree were fired because they wouldn't testify in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Think about, for a minute, what that really means for academic freedom. Academic freedom requires the ability to express, to think, to challenge ideas. That is how we build knowledge. We don't do it independently. We do it by exchange with one another. Tenure was developed in large measure to protect the ability for inquiry, discussion, and debate. I'm giving a speech in New York next Friday about free speech on campus. And so I'm thinking a lot about that as I think about the American tradition of independent thought. But the challenge that you have is, and the predicament you get put in, particularly if you're a University of California regent, for example, is how do you then balance your responsibility for ensuring independent thought and the ability to express freely, which students and faculty both have in our system, with both public safety and your responsibility to burnish the brand. It's tough. It's tough. That may be, in the current environment, other than fiscal challenges, the toughest challenge you may have is how do you navigate that, maintaining the autonomy of the institution, the sanctity, really, of academic freedom, and yet the ability to project that you are an institution that values the people and progress of its state. And that brings us to the influence of external stakeholders. You will be besieged and beset by everybody in the supermarket to the Rotary Club about your institution should do X or Y or Z. Or if you would only fire that football coach, we'd win games. You know, whatever it happens to be. You need to focus always on your mission and on statewide policy. Don't be distracted by the individual inquiries and positions of people. They may, in fact, help you reinforce that, or they may not. But that's what you need to care about. You have to be open to those external inputs because oftentimes there's some good ideas there. You have to keep, though, the decision-making of the board, which is the only entity that can make a decision. You can't make one independently as an individual, as Regent Johnson said this morning. Don't fall under undue pressure from any external audience. And again, that's hard. That's hard when folks are there shoving picket signs in your face. It's hard when you get the midnight call from XYZ legislator. It's hard when the biggest donor you have says to you, well, you know, you can't do that, you can't do that. You have to make sure that you're always focused on the welfare of the institution and fulfilling its mission ethically and accountably. You need to protect academic freedom and support due process. I think I've already covered that. And you need to assure that the institution is accountable to the public. Back again, you're doing things legally, ethically, responsibly, and effectively. What should you not do? Don't ask for big favors from the president. Don't ask for box seats at the 50-yard line. Not good. Don't have conflicts of interest. That'll be gone over by, I think, Vice Chancellor Gomez later today. But essentially, Texas law forbids conflicts of interest. The easy ones, of course, is don't award your brother a contract. Nobody really does that anymore, but there are gradations of conflicts that have to be paid attention to. Don't prejudge situations based on outside comments. What you hear at the Walmart isn't necessarily true. So don't prejudge a situation at your college or university because of something somebody says at the checkout line. It is a piece of data. It's something, you've got it in your head. You may ask the president about it. You may, it may or may not be true, but don't prejudge. Don't engage in special interest pleading. I was a chancellor for a long time. In all that time, I had a lot of board members because over 9 years in a 13-member board, and you're constantly churning it. I've gotten all kinds of requests, not on behalf of the board member, her or himself, not on behalf of his or her own interest or his or her own family or his or her own organization. What I would get is requests on behalf of, Professor Schmo is really, really good, and if you could only give Professor Schmo another $100,000 for his lab, we could be stellar. Well, yeah, that may in fact be true, but it's not appropriate for you to tell the president to put money into Professor Schmo's lab. You cannot be a special interest pleader. You can, of course, say, I've really been impressed by what Professor Schmo has been able to do. What is the long-term vision for how that will help us achieve our mission? You can do that, but you can't say, please give Professor Schmo $100,000 for his lab because he wants it. You can't act as if you are the board, and that was said this morning. The board has its power as the board, not as individuals. Much as you want to let your neighbor know about something that's brewing, that's kind of salacious and kind of fun, can't do it. You can't reveal confidences that you have learned as a board member. When things become public, You maybe has to talk about them, but it's the chair who does the talking, unless the chair has delegated that to some other board member in some specific instance. And for God's sake, don't ask how many gallons of gas the police force used. Micromanaging is not a good use of your time, much less a good use of the time of the president or of anybody else. Now, the president has some things that he should not do either. And one of them, and I've sat on boards, the one I hate, the president doesn't tell you when something's going to happen. And then it happens, and you read about it. And you say, what in the world? We just talked about something and you didn't even mention that? You should not be kept in the dark about things that truly matter to the mission and the reputation of the institution. Now, this one's interesting. The president should not provide you with misleading, insufficient, or too much information. Now, misleading, you kind of understand. Insufficient, you kind of understand. Too much? How many of you have ever gotten the dump? Thousands and thousands of lines of code, and you are then said, well, you got all that information? Well, yeah, but A, I don't know what's important in it. B, you just gave it to me and it's 20,000 pages long. How am I supposed to digest that? And too much. The curation of information is an important presidential responsibility, because you can't be effective in advising and leading an institution if the information you are given is not of the right type. If it's not important enough, if it's not clear enough, and if it's not timely enough. A president should always pay attention to the fact that you are the responsible parties. Under the law, you are the fiduciaries. And the president has to recognize that you then are invested in the success of her or his institution and the way in which it functions. This one is a little harder. Keep silent when a member of the board overreaches her or his authority. And it happens a lot. And if you're a chancellor or a president, you do not want to call out a board member in a public meeting. That's an unwritten no-no, but it's there. But you do want to convey to that board member that certain behaviors are inappropriate or counterproductive. And how do you do that? Usually in consultation with and through the chair. The relationship between the board chair and the president has got to be like this. Because if it's not, then in fact the institution is not going to be well led. You don't want to surprise the board, which goes back to keeping them in the dark. It's the same kind of thing. You want to have appropriate communication as president with your board. The board should not be surprised. And again, the president should not reveal confidences that she or he has learned from you any more than you should reveal them that you have learned from her or him. Terry McTaggart, who used to be the chancellor in Maine, developed this sort of matrix some time ago about what makes boards good or great. And how much time we got left? All right, let's quickly go through this and then we'll take questions. If you're doing your job, you're getting the work done and you're doing things right. You're meeting your legal obligations. But if you're a high-performing board, you're going to decide what's the most important thing to do, and that's what you're going to do. You're going to focus not just on doing things right, which you have to do, that's a sine qua non, but on doing the right things. You know, we're good enough. We didn't get any audit exceptions this year. We're fine. Or we want to be the best. The best of our type of institution in our state, or the best at meeting our mission, running your own race. Yeah, we have a strategic plan. Yes, you do. But how is it aligned? Is it true to your mission? Is it really likely to work, or is it some pie-in-the-sky dream? Is it of the proper scale for your institution and its resource base and its history and its location and a whole variety of other things we're going to talk about in the next session? And do you have buy-in from the appropriate stakeholders? And we could talk forever about who the appropriate stakeholders are, and we can do that perhaps at another time because there's a lot of them. You care about always improving yourself? Yeah, that's important. But you're caring in high-performing boards about substantial improvement. And you're caring here about the quality of what you do, not just that you do it. And here you get to the second one, which is educational effectiveness. What do your students learn? What should they learn? What do they learn? How can they use it? And in fact, is it what will help them succeed in life after they have achieved their degrees? That's an important thing for boards to care about. You aren't delivering education, but you ought to be able to ask the question, are we doing the right thing, and are our students learning? You react to challenge, or you focus on change. You got enough money? No, you're trying to grow your financial strength, aligned with your mission and vision. You don't want to be irresponsible, but you want to always be looking for how can you improve your position. You care about getting positive recognition in the local paper? Yeah, that's important. But are you really becoming important on the regional, national, and world stage? Are you distinctive? Are you important? You care about those things. And that can mean as much for a community college as it does for a research institution. You got to care about what it is you're trying to achieve and be the best at what you can do. Well, you know, Joe Schmo's a great guy. If we put $100,000 in his lab, we'll be stellar. No, you got to measure what matters. What matters to your institution and its success, not necessarily what you heard in the supermarket. I show up to all the board meetings, but do you engage in them? Are you fully committed to the mission of the institution? Are you focusing on the top priorities? A lot of boards defer to their presidents. After all, the president knows everything, right? Presidents are omniscient. I was a chancellor. I knew everything. No. But what you want to have with your president are shared goals, but separate emphases. She or he is responsible for executing certain things. You are responsible for setting that playing field and setting those goalposts. You can work effectively with a quality president and a quality board, essentially in the magic of dialogue, constructive, informed, unafraid, direct, plain talk. You embrace change, and for the private boards, you give a lot of money. I don't know if that's a requirement in Texas for the public boards. In other words, you've got an engaged board. And that's really what we strive for, is a highly performing board, not just an adequately functioning board. So, questions, comments, observations, brickbats. I'm pretty good at dodging tomatoes. After all, I was a chancellor. I had to deal with the faculty senates of 7 different institutions. And any questions, any comments, anything you want to say? Yes, ma'am.
You skipped over because there was not folks in the room, but the public company boards versus the
Right.
Yeah. Could you go back to that slide and talk about the differences?
I could probably do that if I were clever. Let me see how clever I am. Oops. I think the most important thing is this first one. To whom are you responsible? In American corporate Securities and Exchange Commission culture, your responsibility is to the shareholders of the company. You cannot do things that dilute the value to those shareholders of their investment. You have to be always attentive to their interests. When you're in a public college or university, who you're responsible to are actually the citizens of the state of Texas. You have to do things that are in the interest of the citizens of the state of Texas. you can see that all the way down through here, you have very similar, I mean, there are nuances as to what are meant by the terms, but down here to duty of candor and the right to speak. In a public corporation, a board member is responsible for telling fellow board members and the CEO in an unvarnished way what she or he believes to be true. You have the right to speak. You don't have to call somebody out the way you might have to in a public corporation board, which are closed meetings usually. You have a duty to disclose the materiality thing, getting back to the responsible shareholders. Here's the other really important distinction: the public meetings and the public records. Yes, a duty to disclose exists in a public corporation. But you figure out what you're going to disclose and what you think is material, and that is what you disclose, and you disclose it in a way that basically the Securities and Exchange Commission prescribes. Over here, with public meetings and public records, in each state, there are requirements for what may or must be conducted in open public session, and what records may or must be provided upon request, as opposed to what can go into a closed session and what can be redacted. And in fact, in every state, there are slight nuances that are different. The most open of all the states is probably Florida. In Florida, you basically can't have, I think it's more than 2 board members talking together at any one time without calling a public meeting. You can't even talk on the phone without calling a public meeting. If you are an applicant for a job in Florida, in fact, that's public information from day one. Other states are less restrictive, particularly on personnel policies and disciplinary stuff, but it varies from state to state. But that is a really important distinction. So if you were to look at the 2 that I think matter the most, it's who are you responsible to, and the public meetings and public records are the biggest distinctions. Other questions? See, I wore you all out. And what you didn't know is that by wearing you all out right now, I'm probably going to wear you out less next time, because I have a cold and I can hardly talk. I'm losing my voice. You're going to be happy. All right. Well, I guess thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'll see you all after a break.